Hello, and welcome to the Sherlock Holmes Story Hour, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Fade-in soft, sepia-toned image of 221B Baker Street at dusk, fog rolling in, gas lamps flickering. Gentle violin music swells as the camera pans to the sitting room window. It was a chill autumn evening in the year 1895, when the fog of London hung thick as a shroud over the bustling streets, that my friend Sherlock Holmes and I found ourselves drawn into one of the most perplexing cases of our acquaintance. I, Dr. John Watson, had just returned from my rounds at the hospital, my coat still damp from the mist, when Mrs. Hudson announced a visitor. The man who entered our rooms at 221B Baker Street was of middle age, with a gaunt face framed by prematurely grey hair, his eyes darting with the unease of one pursued by shadows. He introduced himself as Dr. Mortimer Gray, a physician of some repute in Harley Street. Chapter 1. The Arrival of Dr. Gray. It was then that Mrs. Hudson, our ever-patient landlady, knocked softly and announced a visitor. "A gentleman, Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice tinged with concern and in a dreadful state, if I may say so. Holmes's eyes gleamed with that peculiar spark that heralded the scent of a case. "Show him in, Mrs. Hudson," he replied, setting aside his pipe with a deliberate motion. The man who entered was of middle years, though his hair was streaked with premature grey, giving him the appearance of one burdened far beyond his age. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollowed by sleeplessness or fear, and his hands trembled as he clutched a black medical bag. He wore a well-tailored frock coat, though it was creased, as if he had not changed in days. His gaze darted about the room before settling on Holmes, and in that moment I sensed the weight of a man pursued by unseen terrors. Visual close-up on Dr. Mortimer Gray entering, his face illuminated by flickering gaslight, revealing lines of worry. He hands his hat to Mrs. Hudson, who exits quietly. The camera lingers on his trembling hands clutching the bag, then cuts to Holmes rising, his expression keen and observant. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I presume," the man said, his voice low and faltering. "And Dr. Watson? I am Dr. Mortimer Gray, a physician of Harley Street. I come to you in the utmost desperation, for my life, nay, perhaps my very soul, is in peril." Holmes gestured to a chair opposite the fire. "Pray, be seated, Dr. Gray, and compose yourself. Watson, if you would be so kind as to pour our guest a brandy. Now, sir, relate the facts in precise order, omitting no detail, however trivial it may seem." I poured a measure of brandy from the decanter and handed it to Gray, noting how his fingers tightened around the glass, as if it were an anchor. He took a sip, coughed slightly, and began his tale, his words tumbling forth like leaves caught in a storm. Visual Gray seated, clutching the brandy glass, firelight casting shadows that dance across his face. Holmes leans forward, his fingers steepled, eyes unblinking. Watson stands nearby, notebook in hand, ready to record. "2 nights ago," Gray began, "my closest associate, Dr. Elias Thorne, was found dead in his study at our shared practice. Poisoned, the police say, by a rare toxin, curare, derived from a South American plant. He was discovered slumped over his desk, a glass of port beside him, the contents laced with the poison. There was no bottle, no vial, no sign of how it was administered. The police are baffled, Mr. Holmes, and I am terrified, for I have received this." He reached into his coat pocket and produced a crumpled letter, its edges singed as though it had been held too close to a flame. Holmes took it with a gloved hand, his movements precise, and examined it under his magnifying glass. The paper was of fine quality, the ink a deep Prussian blue, and the script was elegant yet hurried. As if penned in agitation, the words read, "Your secrets will bury you as they buried Thorn." The grey dawn approaches. Visual close-up on the letter. Holmes's magnifying glass hovering over the singed edges and bold script. Cut to Watson peering over Holmes's shoulder, his brow furrowed. The fire crackles, adding tension. I felt a chill, not from the damp air seeping through the window, but from the ominous tone of the message. "Curare," I said, drawing on my medical knowledge, "is a paralytic poison. Administered orally, it would cause death within minutes, agonizing as the muscles seize. But it is rare in England. How could it have reached Thorn's glass?" Holmes's lips twitched in the faintest of smiles, a sign he was already weaving the threads of the case. "Indeed, Watson. And why come to me, Dr. Gray, rather than rely on Scotland Yard?" Gray hesitated, his eyes flickering to the floor. "Because, Mr. Holmes, there are matters in my past. Experiments conducted during my university days, when I studied under Professor Langley at Cambridge. They were harmless, I assure you. Studies in pharmacology, seeking remedies for nervous disorders. But they were misunderstood, and I fear they may have resurfaced to haunt me." Visual flashback montage. Sepia-toned images of a younger Gray in a university laboratory, mixing chemicals by candlelight. Cut to a shadowy figure watching from a doorway. Return to present. Gray's face tense, Holmes's eyes narrowing. I exchanged a glance with Holmes. The man's distress was palpable, yet there was a shadow of evasion in his manner, a reluctance that suggested more than he divulged. Holmes folded the letter and placed it on the table, his fingers drumming lightly. A habit that betrayed his mind was racing. "Tell me of Dr. Thorn," Holmes said. "Your partnership, your practice, your patients. Leave nothing out." Gray took another sip of brandy, steadying himself. "Elias and I have practiced together for a decade, specializing in disorders of the mind and nerves. Our patients are among London's elite, lords, ladies, men of industry. Thorn was meticulous, brilliant in diagnosis, but stern. He had enemies, as all successful men do. Rivals in the medical field, perhaps, or patients dissatisfied with their treatment. One such, a Mr. Reginald Blackwood, accused us of malpractice after his condition, lockjaw, worsened under our care. He threatened legal action, but we thought it idle." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And your own enemies, Dr. Gray? Those misunderstood experiments?" Gray paled. "There was a patient years ago at Bethlehem Asylum where I briefly consulted. A woman, Eliza Voss, who died under my care. The coroner ruled it natural, but whispers of poison persisted. Her brother Samuel vowed revenge, though I swear I did no wrong." Visual, another flashback. Bethlehem Asylum's grim facade, iron gates, a woman's silhouette in a barred window. Cut to a menacing figure, Samuel, in a dark coat, staring at Gray's surgery. The room grew quiet, save for the crackle of the fire and the distant rumble of a passing cab. Holmes leaned back, his gaze fixed on Gray. "You have done well to come to me, Doctor. This letter, the poison, the shadows of your past, these are threads in a tapestry I shall unravel. Watson, we shall visit Harley Street tomorrow to inspect the scene. Dr. Gray, remain at your practice and speak of this to no one." Gray nodded, gratitude and fear mingling in his expression. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I shall do as you say." As he departed into the foggy night, his figure swallowed by the mist, I turned to Holmes. "What do you make of it, Holmes? A revenge plot from the past or something nearer?" Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling like the fog outside. "The curare is curious, Watson. A poison so exotic suggests intent, not impulse. And the letter, its theatrical tone, hints at misdirection. We are dealing with a mind both cunning and desperate. But come, let us rest. Tomorrow, the game begins. Thus began the case I have titled The Sinister Secrets of Dr. Mortimer Gray, a mystery that would lead us through the fog-shrouded alleys of London and into the heart of human ambition and deceit. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Surgery. The morning following Dr. Mortimer Gray's agitated visit to 221B Baker Street found Sherlock Holmes and me, Dr. John Watson, rattling through the fog-laden streets of London in a hansom cab, bound for the late Dr. Elias Thorne's surgery. The air was thick with the acrid scent of coal smoke, mingling with the damp earthiness of autumn, and the city seemed to hold its breath as if complicit in the mystery we sought to unravel. Holmes beside me was silent, his sharp profile etched against the cab's window, his eyes scanning the blurred shapes of passers-by, as if each held a clue to the puzzle of Thorne's death. Visual interior of the cab, Holmes peering out, his expression intense. Watson adjusts his scarf against the chill, his face showing both curiosity and concern. Cut to exterior of Harley Street, a row of elegant Georgian buildings, their brass plaques gleaming faintly. We alighted before a handsome building, its door adorned with a polished brass plate reading Gray and Thorne, Physicians. Dr. Gray awaited us, his gaunt figure framed in the doorway, his grey hair dishevelled as if he had not slept. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice low, "I am grateful for your promptness. The police have come and gone, but they found nothing conclusive. I fear the truth lies deeper." Holmes's eyes swept over Gray, noting, I was certain, every crease in his coat, every tremor in his hands. "Show us to the study, Doctor," he said, his tone brisk, "and touch nothing, if you please." Visual Gray leading Holmes and Watson through a dimly lit hallway, lined with portraits of stern medical men. The camera lingers on a flickering gas lamp, casting eerie shadows. Transition to the study, a cluttered room with oak panelling, shelves of medical tomes and glass cabinets filled with vials and instruments. The study where Dr. Thorne had met his end was a testament to Victorian science, its air heavy with the scent of carbolic acid and old leather. A large oak desk dominated the room, its surface stained with ink and littered with papers. Beside it stood a crystal decanter of port, half full, and a single glass, its rim still bearing traces of the fatal curare. The chair was pushed back, as if Thorne had risen in his final moments, and a faint chalky residue dusted the carpet beneath. Visual close-up on the desk, the port glass catching the light, a faint greenish tint suggesting poison. The camera pans to the carpet, where Holmes kneels, his magnifying glass glinting. Holmes dropped to one knee, his lens trained on the floor. Watson observed these scratches, fresh, as if something heavy was dragged, perhaps a box or case. And this residue, not chalk as I first thought, but finer. Talcum perhaps, or a medical powder. He scraped a sample into a small envelope, his movements precise. I turned to the port glass. My medical instincts stirred. "Curare is a rare poison in these parts, Holmes," I said, examining the glass under the light. "It paralyzes the muscles, leading to asphyxiation. Administered orally, as it seems here, death would be swift but excruciating. Yet how was it introduced? The decanter shows no trace, and no vial was found." Holmes's lips twitched in that faint smile that signalled his mind was racing. "A pertinent question, Watson. The absence of a container suggests premeditation, a poisoner who covered their tracks." He moved to the desk, sifting through papers with gloved hands. Among them, he found a prescription slip, its ink fresh, signed by Gray for belladonna. A poison in its own right, though not the culprit here. Visual Holmes holding the prescription slip, his magnifying glass hovering over the signature. Cut to Gray, watching nervously, his fingers twisting the hem of his coat. Gray, hovering near the door, cleared his throat. That prescription was for a patient, Mr. Reginald Blackwood, whom I mentioned last night. He suffered from lockjaw, and belladonna was part of his treatment. He was displeased with our care, as I said. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Displeased enough to threaten murder, perhaps? He pocketed the slip, his gaze sweeping the room. Tell me, Dr. Gray, who had access to this study? Only myself, Thorne, and our nurse, Miss Harrow, Gray replied. The servants clean under supervision, and patients are never admitted here. I noted a faint tremor in Gray's voice, and Holmes, I knew, missed nothing. Miss Harrow, he said, we shall speak with her. But first, Watson, assist me in examining the windows. The study's windows overlooked a narrow alley, shrouded in fog. Holmes inspected the sills, finding no signs of forced entry, but a faint smudge of soot caught his eye. Curious, he murmured, this soot is fresh, as if someone leaned against the frame recently, perhaps observing the room. Visual Holmes at the window, fog swirling outside, his fingers tracing the soot smudge. The camera pans to the alley below, where a shadowy figure darts out of sight, their coat flapping in the mist. We descended to the alley, the air cold and damp, the cobblestones slick underfoot. Holmes crouched, his lens scanning the ground. Footprints, Watson. Men's boots, size 10, with a distinctive wear on the left heel. Recent, given the clarity in this wet ground. He followed the trail to a pile of crates, where a discarded matchstick lay, its tip still warm. A watcher in the fog, I said, my pulse quickening. But to what end? Holmes rose, his expression inscrutable. To observe, to plan, or to mislead. The matchstick is a clue, or a red herring. We shall see. Visual close-up on the matchstick, then a wide shot of the foggy alley, the gas lamps barely piercing the gloom. Suspenseful cello music builds. Returning to the study, we questioned Miss Harrow, a young woman with a composed demeanour, though her eyes betrayed unease. Dr. Thorne was kind but strict, she said. He and Dr. Gray argued recently. Over a patient, I think. I heard raised voices, but could not make out the words. Holmes pressed her. And the night of the murder? Where were you? At home, sir, she replied, her voice steady. I left the surgery at 6, as always. Her alibi seemed sound, but Holmes's gaze lingered, as if sensing a crack in her facade. As we prepared to leave, Gray mentioned a detail that chilled me. The police found a scrap of paper in Thorne's hand, torn from a larger sheet. It bore only the word Gray. They thought it insignificant, but Holmes's eyes gleamed. Insignificant? Hardly. It is a thread in the tapestry, Doctor. We shall return tomorrow. Guard this room well. Visual Holmes examining the torn paper with Gray scrawled on it, his face intense. Cut to Gray, pale and anxious, as Holmes and Watson exit into the fog. As we hailed a cab back to Baker Street, the fog seemed to thicken, wrapping London in a shroud of secrets. What do you make of it, Holmes? I asked, my mind turning over the clues. The scratches, the talcum, the soot, the word Gray. Holmes lit his pipe, the match flaring briefly in the cab's dim interior. The scratches suggest something was moved, perhaps to conceal or reveal. The talcum may indicate a medical hand or a deliberate misdirection. The soot and footprints point to an outsider, yet the word Gray implicates our client. We are dealing with a mind that weaves truth and deception in equal measure. I nodded, the logical chain forming a rare poison, a hidden observer, a past grievance. Yet the puzzle was incomplete, the fog of mystery as dense as the air around us. Thus, our investigation into the sinister secrets of Dr. Mortimer Gray began to take shape, each clue a flicker of light in the darkness, each shadow a potential trap. The game, as Holmes would say, was afoot. Chapter 3. The Poisoned Chalice. The investigation into the sinister death of Dr. Elias Thorne led Sherlock Holmes and me, Dr. John Watson, from the fog-shrouded confines of Harley Street to the Golden Chalice, a tavern frequented by London's medical men. The morning's discoveries at Dr. Gray's surgery, the scratches on the floor, the talcum residue, the soot-smudged window, and the cryptic note bearing the word Gray, had set my mind racing, and I could see in Holmes's sharp glance that he, too, was piecing together the threads of this dark tapestry. The chill of the autumn fog clung to our coats as we entered the pub, the scent of ale and pipe smoke a stark contrast to the sterile air of the surgery we had left behind. Visual Holmes and Watson enter the pub, shaking off the damp from their coats. Holmes's eyes scan the room, noting every detail. Watson adjusts his hat, his expression a mix of determination and unease. The camera lingers on a group of boisterous doctors at a far table, their laughter jarring against the tension. We had come to question Mr. Reginald Blackwood, the disgruntled patient Dr. Gray had mentioned, whose accusations of malpractice hinted at a motive for murder. The landlord, a stout man with a waxed moustache, pointed us to a corner table where Blackwood sat alone, nursing a pint. He was a burly fellow, his face weathered by years of labour, his hands large and calloused, stained faintly with ink. A detail that did not escape Holmes's notice. His eyes, when they met ours, burned with a smouldering resentment. Visual close-up on Blackwood's face, his scowl deepening as Holmes and Watson approach. His ink-stained fingers grip the pint glass tightly. The camera cuts to Holmes, his expression calm but piercing, as he pulls out a chair. "Mr. Blackwood," Holmes began, his voice smooth yet commanding, "I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my colleague, Dr. Watson. We are investigating the death of Dr. Elias Thorne. You knew him, I understand, and were displeased with his care." Blackwood's lip curled. Displeased? They botched my treatment, those quacks. Gray and Thorne, with their fancy Harley Street airs. I went to them with lockjaw, could barely open my mouth for the pain, and they prescribed belladonna, poison, mind you. It worsened my condition, left me near crippled for weeks. Thorne laughed it off, said I was imagining things, but Gray, he knows his poisons better than most. I felt a chill at his words, recalling the belladonna prescription Holmes had found. "Lockjaw is a serious condition," I said, drawing on my medical knowledge. "Tetanus, caused by bacterial infection, often from a wound. Belladonna can ease muscle spasms in small doses, but it's dangerous if misapplied." Holmes's eyes narrowed, fixed on Blackwood's hands. "And where were you, sir, on the night Dr. Thorne died? 2 evenings passed between 8 and midnight." Blackwood leaned back, his scowl softening into a smirk. "Right here, drinking with mates. Ask the landlord. He'll vouch for me, as will half a dozen others. I ain't no murderer, Mr. Holmes, but I won't shed tears for Thorne." Visual. The landlord nods from behind the bar, confirming Blackwood's alibi. Holmes's gaze lingers on Blackwood's ink-stained fingers, then shifts to a notepad where he jots a quick sketch of the stains. The camera zooms in on the ink, its deep blue hue reminiscent of the threatening letter's script. Holmes leaned forward, his voice low. "Your hands, Mr. Blackwood. Bear traces of Prussian blue ink. The same used in a threatening letter sent to Dr. Gray. Care to explain? Blackwood's smirk faltered, but he recovered quickly. I'm a clerk by trade when I ain't hauling goods. Ink's part of the job. You think I'd waste my time writing letters to that lot? I'd sooner spit in their port than threaten 'em. Holmes said nothing, but I knew that look. The gears of his mind were turning, weighing Blackwood's words against the evidence. The ink was a compelling clue, yet his alibi seemed ironclad. Was he a red herring, as Holmes often called such distractions, or a piece of the puzzle? Visual Holmes rises, his movements deliberate, as he thanks Blackwood. The camera follows him and Watson, exiting the pub into the foggy street, the gas lamps barely piercing the gloom. A low cello drone builds suspense. As we stepped into the fog, the air was heavy with the scent of wet stone and coal smoke. The clatter of a passing hansom cab echoed, but another sound caught Holmes's ear. Quick footsteps retreating into the mist. "Watson!" he hissed, already breaking into a run. I followed, my heart pounding, as we pursued the unseen figure through a labyrinth of alleys, the fog swallowing all but the faint glow of distant lamps. Visual high-speed chase sequence, Holmes and Watson sprinting through narrow fog-shrouded alleys, cobblestones slick underfoot. Shadows flicker as the figure ahead dodges around corners. The camera captures the tension with quick cuts, accompanied by urgent orchestral music and the sound of boots on stone. The chase ended in a dead-end alley, the figure vanishing as if dissolved into the fog. Holmes, undeterred, scanned the ground with his lens. "Here, Watson, another clue." He held up a small glass vial, empty but labelled curare, South American extract. Its cork was loose, as if dropped in haste. Visual close-up on the vial in Holmes's gloved hand, the label clearly visible. The camera pans to the foggy alley, where a hansom cab's silhouette fades into the distance. The music shifts to a single ominous violin note. "Red herring or clue, Watson?" Holmes mused, pocketing the vial. "The curare confirms the poisoned source, but its presence here is too convenient. Someone wishes us to follow this trail, perhaps to mislead." I caught my breath, my mind racing. The logical chain strengthens Holmes. Blackwood's grudge gives motive, and his ink-stained hands suggest a link to the letter. Now this vial, could he have access to such a poison? Holmes's eyes gleamed in the dim light. Possible, but unlikely. Curare is not a clerk's tool, nor easily acquired. We must look to those with medical knowledge, Gray perhaps, or someone from his past. The word Gray on Thorne's note points to our client, yet the vial points elsewhere. Misdirection, Watson, is the murderer's art. We returned to the Golden Chalice to confirm Blackwood's alibi. The landlord and 3 patrons swore he had not left the pub that night, their accounts consistent. Yet Holmes lingered by the bar, examining a discarded newspaper. "Curious," he said, pointing to a smudged headline about a recent shipment of South American botanicals to a local apothecary. The net widens. Visual Holmes flipping through the newspaper, his finger tracing the headline. Cut to Watson, his expression troubled, as he glances back at the pub's noisy interior. The fog outside thickens, a distant foghorn sounding. As we hailed a cab back to Baker Street, the fog seemed to pulse with secrets, each clue a flicker in the gloom. Blackwood's anger was real, but his alibi held. The vial suggested a poisoner bold enough to taunt us, yet the ink linked back to the threatening letter. And always the shadow of Dr. Gray loomed, his past, his experiments, his fear. "Holmes," I ventured, "suppose Gray himself is the culprit? The note in Thorne's hand, the curare, his evasive manner." Holmes puffed on his pipe, the smoke curling like the fog outside. A hypothesis, Watson, but premature. Gray's fear is genuine, yet his omissions suggest guilt, or knowledge he dares not share. The vial, the ink, the scratches in the study, all pieces of a puzzle designed to mislead. We must seek the next thread, perhaps in Gray's past, as he hinted at Bethlehem Asylum. Thus, the mystery of Dr. Mortimer Gray deepened, each clue a step into the fog, each shadow a potential trap. The game, as Holmes would say, was well and truly afoot. Chapter 4. Whispers from the Asylum. The trail of clues in the sinister death of Dr. Elias Thorne had led Sherlock Holmes and me, Dr. John Watson, from the raucous warmth of the Golden Chalice to the oppressive gloom of Bethlehem Royal Hospital, known to Londoners as Bedlam. The fog clung to the city like a shroud, its damp chill seeping into my bones as our hansom cab rattled to a stop before the asylum's forbidding gates. The discoveries at Dr. Gray's surgery, the scratches, the talcum residue, the curare vial, and the ominous note bearing the word Gray, had deepened the mystery, and Holmes's keen mind was now fixed on Dr. Gray's past, particularly his time at this very institution. As we stepped onto the slick cobblestones, the air heavy with the scent of wet stone and decay, I felt a prickle of unease, as if the walls themselves whispered secrets too dark to be uttered. Visual Holmes and Watson alight from the cab, their breath visible in the cold air. Holmes's greatcoat flaps in the wind as he strides toward the gates, his expression resolute. Watson clutches his medical bag, glancing nervously at the barred windows above. A low, eerie wind sound effect underscores the scene. The warden, a stooped man named Mr. Carver, met us at the entrance, his face as grey as the walls. His eyes, sunken and wary, darted between us as he led us through a labyrinth of corridors. The air thick with the tang of antiseptic and the faint moans of unseen patients. Dr. Gray was here some 15 years ago, Carver said, his voice a gravelly whisper. A young physician, ambitious, studying nervous disorders under Professor Langley. He left after an incident. Holmes's eyes gleamed, his attention razor-sharp. An incident, Mr. Carver? Pray, elaborate. Visual interior of Bedlam. Dimly lit corridors with peeling paint and flickering gas lamps. Shadows of inmates move behind locked doors. The camera focuses on Carver's lined face, his expression guarded, as he leads Holmes and Watson to a dusty records room. We were ushered into a cramped office, its shelves sagging under the weight of leather-bound ledgers. Carver retrieved a file marked Gray Mortimer, M.D., and opened it with trembling hands. He experimented with hypnosis and newfangled drugs, Carver said. Said he was seeking cures for madness, hysteria, melancholia, that sort. Most of his patients improved, but one, Eliza Voss, she died under his care. The coroner called it heart failure, but there were whispers of poison. Her brother Samuel caused a stir, claiming Gray silenced her for knowing too much. I felt a chill, recalling Gray's mention of Eliza Voss the previous night. What did she know? I asked, my medical curiosity piqued. Was there evidence of foul play? Carver shook his head. Nothing proven. But Voss was a clever girl, prone to fits of lucidity. She'd been a governess before her mind broke. Some said she uncovered Gray's experiments, dangerous ones, mixing toxins to calm the nerves. Samuel swore revenge, but he vanished after the inquest. Visual flashback montage, sepia-toned images of a young Dr. Gray in a white coat, administering a syringe to a pale woman in a barred room. Her eyes wide with fear meet his. Cut to a shadowy figure, Samuel, shouting in a courtroom, then disappearing into a foggy street. Return to present. Holmes flipping through the file, his fingers pausing on a yellowed letter. Holmes extracted a letter from the file, its script elegant but hurried, written in the same Prussian blue ink as the threatening note sent to Gray. It was penned by Eliza Voss, addressed to her brother, and read Samuel, "Beware Dr. Gray. His remedies are not what they seem. I fear for my life." The letter was torn, as if someone had tried to destroy it. Visual close-up on the letter. Holmes's magnifying glass hovering over the ink. The camera zooms in on the words "Beware Dr. Gray," then cuts to Watson's troubled expression. A soft, ominous violin note plays. "This ink," Holmes murmured, "is identical to that of Gray's letter. Prussian blue, rare for personal correspondence, but common in medical notes." And the tear suggests someone sought to suppress this evidence. He turned to Carver. Who else had access to these records? Only the staff, Carver replied, and Gray himself during his tenure. The files are locked, but, well, locks can be picked. Holmes's lips twitched in that faint smile that signalled a breakthrough. Indeed, Watson, note the pattern: a past grievance, a poison, a letter linking to Gray. Yet the ease of this discovery troubles me. It is too neat, as if placed for us to find. I nodded, the logical chain forming in my mind. Eliza Voss's death, Samuel's vendetta, the curare vial from the alley. Could Samuel be our poisoner, seeking revenge after all these years? Holmes pocketed a copy of the letter, his gaze distant. Possible. But consider curare as a sophisticated choice, requiring knowledge and access. Samuel Voss, a labourer by all accounts, may lack the means. We must find him, Watson, and learn what he knows. Visual Holmes tucking the letter into his coat, his expression intense. The camera pans to the records room's window, where fog presses against the glass like a living thing. A distant scream from an inmate adds a chilling sound effect. We ventured deeper into Bedlam, seeking any trace of Samuel Voss. The corridors grew narrower, the air colder, as we passed cells where patients muttered or stared vacantly. In one, a woman clutched a tattered shawl, her eyes eerily reminiscent of Eliza's description in the file. "She sees them," she whispered, unprompted. "The grey shadows, they poison the heart." I shivered, but Holmes pressed on, questioning orderlies about Samuel. One, a nervous youth, recalled seeing a man matching Samuel's description, a tall, gaunt figure with a medical tattoo, loitering near the asylum gates a week prior. He asked about Gray, the orderly said he had business with him. Visual, the orderly, lit by a single gas lamp, his face pale as he speaks. Cut to an exterior shot of the asylum gates. A shadowy figure with a tattooed arm slipping into the fog. A low cello drone builds tension. Holmes's eyes gleamed. A medical tattoo, curious for a labourer. This suggests a connection to Gray's university days, perhaps a shared past. We must trace Samuel Voss, Watson, but I suspect he is a pawn in a larger game. As we left Bedlam, the fog seemed to thicken, the asylum's walls fading into the mist like a fading nightmare. In the cab back to Baker Street, I turned to Holmes. The letter from Eliza points to Gray's guilt, yet the curare vial and Samuel's presence suggest another hand. Is Gray the victim or the villain? Holmes lit his pipe, the match flaring briefly in the cab's dim interior. Both, perhaps, or neither. The letter's ink matches Gray's note, yet its discovery is too convenient. A red herring, designed to lead us to Samuel. The tattoo, the curare, the word Gray, each clue is a thread in a web of deception. We must seek Samuel, but also Gray's university records. The truth lies in the shadows of his past. Visual, The cab rattles through foggy London, Holmes puffing on his pipe, his face half lit by a passing gas lamp. Watson gazes out, his expression troubled, as the camera pulls back to show the city's misty skyline, the music fading to a soft, suspenseful hum. The whispers from Bedlam lingered in my mind. Eliza's warning, Samuel's vendetta, the spectre of poison. Each clue deepened the mystery, yet each seemed to point in conflicting directions. Was Samuel Voss the avenger, or was Gray's past a smokescreen for a more sinister truth? The game, as Holmes would say, was growing darker. Chapter 5. The Fog-Shrouded Alley. The trail of the sinister secrets surrounding Dr. Mortimer Gray had grown darker with each step, and Sherlock Holmes and I, Dr. John Watson, now found ourselves plunged into the heart of London's underbelly. The discoveries at Bethlehem Asylum, the letter from Eliza Voss, the whispers of poison, and the sighting of her brother Samuel with his medical tattoo had sharpened Holmes's focus on this elusive figure. The fog ever present in this autumn of 1895 seemed to conspire with the mystery, cloaking our path as we sought Samuel Voss, whose vendetta against Gray might hold the key to Dr. Elias Thorne's murder. Our hansom cab had barely left Bedlam's grim gates, when Holmes, with that uncanny instinct of his, spotted a figure slipping into an alley near the asylum, his gait hurried and his coat marked by a familiar tattooed arm. Visual exterior of Bedlam, Holmes and Watson climbing into a cab. Holmes's eyes catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure darting into an alley. The camera cuts to a close-up of the figure's arm, revealing a medical caduceus tattoo, then zooms out as Holmes leaps from the cab shouting, "After him! Watson! Quick, Watson!" Holmes cried, his greatcoat flaring as he vaulted from the cab. Followed my heart pounding, my medical bag slung across my shoulder as we plunged into the fog-shrouded alley. The cobblestones were slick underfoot, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and coal smoke. The figure ahead was a phantom, his outline blurring in the mist. But Holmes's keen eyes tracked his every move, his long strides eating up the distance. Visual high-speed chase sequence. Holmes and Watson sprinting through twisting alleys, gas lamps casting fleeting pools of light. The figure ahead dodges crates and barrels, his coat flapping. The camera alternates between close-ups of Holmes's determined face and wide shots of the foggy labyrinth, with urgent strings and percussion driving the tension. The chase led us through a maze of narrow passages, the fog so dense I could scarcely see 10 paces ahead. The figure darted around a corner, and I heard a clatter. A crate overturned, perhaps deliberately to slow us. Holmes, undeterred, vaulted the obstacle, his lens already in hand as he scanned the ground. "Footprints, Watson," he called. "The same size 10 boots with the worn left heel we found at the surgery. Our quarry is no stranger to this case." I caught my breath, my mind racing. Samuel Voss, then, seeking revenge for his sister's death. Holmes's eyes gleamed in the dim light of a gas lamp. Perhaps, but observe, this alley leads to the Thames. He's heading somewhere specific. We pressed on, the fog parting briefly to reveal the glint of the river ahead, its surface a murky mirror reflecting the city's secrets. Visual, the camera pans to the Thames, its waters dark and rippling under the fog. The figure pauses near a warehouse, silhouetted against the river's glow. Holmes and Watson close in, their breaths visible in the cold air. The chase ended at a dilapidated warehouse by the riverbank, its windows boarded, its walls stained with soot. The figure slipped inside, but Holmes was upon him in an instant, his shoulder forcing the door open with a creak. Inside, the air was musty, thick with the scent of mildew and old crates. Our quarry stood cornered, his face revealed in the dim light filtering through a broken window. A gaunt man, perhaps 40, with a medical tattoo stark against his forearm. It was indeed Samuel Voss, his eyes wild with desperation. Visual interior of the warehouse, cluttered with crates and ropes lit by slivers of moonlight. Samuel Voss stands against a wall, his face pale, his tattoo visible. Holmes advances, his expression unyielding, while Watson grips his revolver, ready for trouble. "You're mistaken," Voss cried, his voice hoarse. "I didn't kill Thorne. Gray framed me. He stole my curare for his experiments, years ago, when Eliza died. He's the poisoner, not I." Holmes's gaze was steely. "Then explain your presence near the asylum, and this." He held up the curare vial from the alley, its label glinting faintly. "You dropped this in your flight." Voss's shoulders slumped. "I was watching. Gray's surgery, yes, to find proof of his crimes. That vial, I took it from his lab long ago, kept it as evidence. I dropped it in panic when I saw you following, but I swear I've killed no one." Visual close-up on the curare vial in Holmes's hand, then on Voss's pleading face. The camera lingers on his tattoo, then cuts to Watson, his revolver lowered but his expression wary. Holmes stepped closer, his voice low. "Your sister's letter accused Gray of dangerous remedies. What did she know?" Voss's eyes darted, as if fearing the shadows themselves. Eliza was a patient at Bedlam, under Gray's care. He tested new toxins, synthetic poisons he called them, to calm the mind. She wrote to me, said they made her worse, that Gray feared her speaking out. Then she died, and he called it heart failure. I found curare in his lab, took it to expose him, but he was too powerful. Now Thorne's dead, and Gray's pointing the finger at me. I felt a surge of sympathy, but suspicion lingered. "Why not go to the policeman?" I asked. "Why skulk in alleys?" Voss's voice broke. "Who'd believe me over a Harley Street doctor? Gray's got friends in high places. I had to find proof myself." Holmes examined a crate nearby, his lens revealing a faint residue, talcum like that at the surgery. "Curious," he murmured. "This warehouse is a staging ground, Watson. Note the ledger here." He produced a small book, its pages listing chemical purchases, including curare, in Gray's handwriting, or so it seemed. Visual Holmes flipping through the ledger, his fingers tracing entries. Close up on the word curare, written in Prussian blue ink. The camera pans to Watson, his face troubled, then to Voss, who looks both defiant and afraid. "Forged, perhaps?" I ventured, recalling Holmes's knack for spotting such tricks. "The ink looks too fresh for an old ledger." Holmes nodded, his eyes gleaming. "Precisely, Watson. The ledger is a plant meant to incriminate Voss, or Gray. The talcum links to the surgery, suggesting someone moved evidence here. Our poisoner is cunning, weaving a web of misdirection." Voss's voice rose. "It's Gray! He's covering his tracks, using me as the scapegoat." Holmes pocketed the ledger, his expression inscrutable. "We shall see, Mr. Voss. For now, you will accompany us to Scotland Yard. Inspector Lestrade will hold you until we verify your tale." Visual Voss, hands bound, being led out of the warehouse by Holmes and Watson. The fog outside is denser, the river's murmur blending with a low cello drone. The camera lingers on the ledger in Holmes's hand, then fades to a shot of the Thames route, its waters swallowing the light. In the cab to Scotland Yard, the fog pressed against the windows, a fitting metaphor for the mystery's opacity. I turned to Holmes, my mind wrestling with the clues. Voss's story fits the evidence, his sister's death, the curare, the tattoo. Yet the ledger feels staged, and Gray's fear seemed genuine. Is Voss the Avenger, or is Gray playing a deeper game? Holmes lit his pipe, the match flaring briefly. The logical chain, Watson Eliza's death gives Voss motive, the curare vial suggests means, and his presence near the surgery points to opportunity. Yet the ledger's fresh ink and the talcum residue scream misdirection. Gray's experiments, synthetic poisons as Voss claims, may be the key. We must examine Gray's university records and question his nurse, Miss Harrow, further. The truth lies in the shadows of their shared past. Visual, the cab rattles through the foggy streets, Holmes puffing on his pipe, his face half lit by a passing gas lamp. Watson gazes out, his expression a mix of resolve and uncertainty. The camera pulls back to show London's misty skyline, the music fading to a suspenseful hum. The chase through the fog-shrouded alley had brought us closer to the heart of the mystery, yet each clue seemed to twist the puzzle further. Samuel Voss, with his tattoo and stolen vial, was either a wronged man or a cunning decoy. Dr. Gray's shadow loomed larger, his past experiments a spectre that haunted every step. The game, as Holmes would say, was growing ever more perilous. Chapter 6. Secrets in the Laboratory. The pursuit of Samuel Voss through London's fog-shrouded alleys had left Sherlock Holmes and me, Dr. John Watson, with more questions than answers. Yet it had sharpened our focus on Dr. Mortimer Gray's shadowy past. The ledger found in the warehouse, with its suspiciously fresh ink, and Voss's tale of stolen curare and experimental poisons pointed to a deeper secret, one that Holmes believed lay hidden within Gray's own domain. Thus, on a chill evening in the autumn of 1895, we returned to Harley Street, this time to explore a lead Holmes had gleaned from a cryptic note in the ledger, a reference to a private laboratory beneath the surgery. As we stood before the unassuming door to the basement, the fog outside seemed to pulse with the city's secrets, and I felt a prickle of apprehension, as if we were about to unearth something both profound and perilous. Visual exterior of Harley Street at dusk, fog swirling around gas lamps. Holmes and Watson, cloaked in greatcoats, approach a side entrance, Holmes's lockpick glinting as he works the door. The camera follows them down a narrow staircase, the walls damp and moss-stained, into the laboratory below. Holmes had insisted on stealth, suspecting Gray might conceal evidence if forewarned. The basement door yielded to his deft touch, and we descended a creaking staircase into a cavernous chamber that seemed more alchemist's lair than physician's workspace. The air was heavy with the scent of sulphur and ether, and shelves lined the walls, laden with vials of colourful liquids, distillation flasks, and medical tomes bound in cracked leather. A central table held a complex apparatus of glass tubes and burners, its contents emitting a faint green glow that cast unearthly shadows. Visual close-up on the laboratory apparatus, green liquid bubbling in a flask, steam rising. The camera pans to shelves of labelled vials, arsenic, belladonna, curare, and a dusty journal open on the table. Holmes's silhouette moves through the shadows, his magnifying glass catching the light. Holmes's eyes gleamed with that fierce intensity that marked his engagement with a puzzle. "Watson, observe the precision of this setup," he said, his voice low. "This is no mere physician's study. This is a laboratory for experimental pharmacology, perhaps the source of the synthetic poison Voss spoke of." I approached the table, my medical training drawing me to the journal. Its pages, written in Gray's meticulous hand, detailed experiments with novel compounds designed to calm the disordered mind. One entry caught my eye, compound X7, derived from curare and proprietary alkaloids, induces rapid paralysis in minute doses. Intended for merciful ends in terminal cases, but lethal if misused. The implications chilled me. Euthanasia or murder. Visual close-up on the journal, Watson's gloved hand turning pages, the word euthanasia underlined in Prussian blue ink. Cut to Holmes examining a vial, his face half lit by the green glow, his expression one of grim fascination. "Holmes," I said, my voice hushed, "this suggests Gray was developing a poison undetectable by standard tests. Could this compound X7 be what killed Thorne?" Holmes nodded, his lens trained on a rack of vials, one labelled X7 and half empty. "Indeed, Watson. Curare, in its natural form, is traceable, but a synthetic variant could evade detection. Note the residue here. Talcum, identical to that at the surgery. Someone handled these vials carelessly or deliberately." He moved to a locked cabinet, its keyhole scratched as if recently forced. Inside, we found more vials, a syringe, and a crumpled note in a hurried script Blackwood knows too much. Dispose of evidence. The ink was fresh, the handwriting unlike Gray's, suggesting another hand, perhaps a Confederate or a plant to incriminate. Visual Holmes forcing the cabinet open, revealing vials and the note. The camera zooms in on the words Blackwood knows, then cuts to Watson's troubled expression. A soft, ominous cello note underscores the discovery. "This note is staged," Holmes murmured. "The ink is too fresh, the cabinet scratches too deliberate. Someone wishes us to suspect Blackwood again. Yet the talcum links to the surgery's inner circle. Gray, Miss Harrow, or an unknown party. I felt a moral quandary stir within me. If Gray's experiments were for euthanasia, to ease suffering, is he a healer or a killer? The line blurs, Holmes. Holmes's eyes softened briefly, a rare glimpse of empathy. A profound question, Watson. In medicine, as in life, intent matters but outcomes judge. If Gray's compound killed Thorne, intent becomes irrelevant. He pocketed the note and a sample of X7, his movements precise. Visual Holmes, slipping the vial and note into his coat, his face resolute. The camera pans to the laboratory's high window, where fog presses against the bars, a faint shadow moving outside. A distant clatter adds a jolt of suspense. As we explored further, a faint noise, a scuffle from above, drew Holmes's attention. "Quick, Watson," he whispered, leading us to a hidden stair behind a bookcase. We ascended to find the surgery's main floor undisturbed, but a window was ajar, its sill marked with fresh soot, like that at the study. Holmes examined it, his lens revealing a single hair. Dark, coarse, unlike Gray's grey locks. "An intruder," he said, "or another misdirection. The soot matches our earlier find, suggesting a pattern of surveillance. But the hair? Curious. Not Gray's, nor Miss Harrow's. Visual close-up on the soot-smudged sill and the single hair under Holmes's lens. The camera pulls back to show the empty surgery, gas lamps flickering, then cuts to the foggy street outside, where a figure slips away, unseen. We return to the laboratory to secure the journal, but Holmes paused, his gaze fixed on the apparatus. "This setup requires expertise," he said. "Gray's work here was advanced, perhaps collaborative. Thorne may have known of it, or opposed it, leading to his death." I nodded. The logical chain forming Gray's experiments provide the means. Compound X7. Thorne's knowledge gives motive, if Gray feared exposure. The note implicates Blackwood, but its staging points to someone closer. Miss Harrow, perhaps? Holmes's lips twitched. "A sound hypothesis, Watson, but the hair and soot suggest an outsider. We must question Miss Harrow, and trace this hair. And we must analyze X7. Its composition may confirm its role in Thorne's death. As we left the surgery, the fog seemed to thicken, wrapping Harley Street in a cloak of mystery. In our cab back to Baker Street, I turned to Holmes, my mind wrestling with the moral weight of our findings. If Gray's intent was mercy, yet it led to murder, what does that say of ambition unchecked? Holmes lit his pipe, the match flaring in the dim cab. It says, Watson, that the dose makes the poison. Gray's experiments, noble or not, have woven a deadly web. The talcum, the note, the hair, all threads in a tapestry of deception. We must unravel it before another falls. Visual. The cab rattles through foggy London, Holmes puffing on his pipe, his face half lit by a passing gas lamp. Watson gazes out, his expression troubled, as the camera pulls back to show the city's misty skyline, the music fading to a suspenseful hum. The laboratory's secrets had cast a new light on Dr. Gray's past, yet each clue deepened the shadows. Was Gray a misguided healer or a calculating killer? The staged note and mysterious hair pointed to a larger conspiracy, with Miss Harrow or an unknown intruder lurking at its edges. The game, as Holmes would say, was growing ever more intricate. Chapter 7. The Betrayed. Confidant. The unearthing of Dr. Mortimer Gray's secret laboratory, with its chilling journal entries and the synthetic poison compound X7, had deepened the mystery surrounding Dr. Elias Thorne's death, and Sherlock Holmes and I, Dr. John Watson, now found ourselves at Scotland Yard, seeking answers from those closest to the heart of the case. The fog of London, ever present in this autumn of 1895, seemed to mirror the opacity of the clues we had gathered, the staged note implicating Reginald Blackwood, the mysterious hair and soot at the surgery, and Samuel Voss's vehement accusations against Gray. Holmes's mind, sharp as a scalpel, had turned to Miss Harrow, the nurse at Gray's practice, whose composed demeanour and vague alibi hinted at secrets untold. As we entered the interrogation room, accompanied by the ever-sceptical Inspector Lestrade, I felt the weight of the case pressing upon me, as if the fog itself conspired to obscure the truth. Visual interior of the interrogation room, stark and utilitarian, with a wooden table and chairs. Miss Harrow sits, her hands folded, her face pale but composed. Holmes stands, his greatcoat draped over a chair, his eyes piercing. Watson and Lestrade flank the table, Lestrade's expression one of mild impatience. The camera lingers on a flickering gas lamp, its light dancing on the walls. Miss Harrow was a young woman of perhaps 25. Her dark hair neatly pinned, her nurse's uniform crisp despite the late hour. Her eyes, though steady, betrayed a flicker of unease as Holmes began. "Miss Harrow," he said, his voice calm yet commanding, "you were Dr. Gray's and Dr. Thorne's nurse, privy to their practice and, I suspect, their confidences. Tell us of the night Dr. Thorne died. You claim you left the surgery at 6, but what did you see or hear before then?" She clasped her hands tighter, her knuckles whitening. "As I told the police, sir, I left at 6, as is my custom. Dr. Thorne was in his study, working late. Dr. Gray had gone home earlier. I heard nothing unusual, only the usual sounds of the surgery, patients in the waiting room, the clink of instruments." Holmes leaned forward, his gaze unyielding. "Yet you mentioned to us yesterday that Gray and Thorne argued recently over a patient. What was the nature of this dispute?" Visual close-up on Miss Harrow's face, her eyes darting briefly to the side. The camera cuts to Holmes, his fingers steepled, his expression one of intense scrutiny. A soft, suspenseful violin note underscores the moment. Miss Harrow hesitated, then spoke, her voice trembling slightly. It was about Mr. Blackwood, the patient who accused them of malpractice. Dr. Thorne was furious, said Blackwood's threats could ruin their reputation. Dr. Gray urged calm, saying it would pass, but their voices grew heated. I couldn't hear all of it, but Dr. Thorne mentioned something about experiments and exposure. I thought it a professional disagreement, nothing more. I exchanged a glance with Holmes, my mind racing. The mention of experiments echoed the journal we had found, with its references to compound X7 and euthanasia. Miss Harrow, I interjected, my medical instinct stirred. As a nurse, you'd have access to the surgery's supplies. Did you ever handle curare or notice anything unusual in the laboratory? Her eyes widened, a tear glinting in the gaslight. Never curare, Dr. Watson. I managed the standard medicines, belladonna, laudanum, the like. The laboratory was Dr. Gray's domain, and Dr. Thorne's at times. I rarely went there. Holmes's lips twitched, a sign he detected a crack in her facade. Yet you were aware of its existence, he said, and the note we found, implicating Blackwood, was in a hand unlike Gray's. Have you seen such handwriting before? Visual flashback to the laboratory. The crumpled note reading Blackwood knows too much, held in Holmes's gloved hand. Cut back to Miss Harrow, her face paling, her hands trembling slightly. The camera zooms in on her eyes, where a tear threatens to fall. Miss Harrow's voice broke. I don't know about any note, Mr. Holmes. But Dr. Thorne was troubled in his final days. He spoke of a secret, something he regretted knowing. He said Dr. Gray had gone too far, that their work would damn them both. Lestrade, who had been silent, snorted. Sounds like motive to me, Holmes. If Thorne threatened to expose Gray's experiments, Gray had reason to silence him. Holmes's eyes never left Miss Harrow. Perhaps, Inspector, but let us test Miss Harrow's alibi. You claim you were home that night. Can anyone confirm this? She hesitated, then nodded. My landlady, Mrs. Carter, saw me return at 6:30. I was in my room all evening reading. Holmes paced, his shadow looming on the wall. Yet the surgery's window was ajar, marked with soot and a hair, dark, coarse, unlike Gray's. And you, Miss Harrow, have dark hair. Were you there later than you claim? Visual close-up on Miss Harrow's dark hair, a single strand falling loose as she shakes her head. The camera cuts to a flashback of the surgery's window, the soot smudge and hair under Holmes's magnifying glass. A low cello drone builds tension. I swear, I was not, she cried, tears spilling now. I cared for Dr. Thorne. He was kind to me, more than Dr. Gray. But there was something between them, a rift. Dr. Thorne once hinted he loved me, but I rebuffed him. Perhaps he was jealous of Dr. Gray, or angry over their work. I felt a jolt. Jealousy as a motive. It was a new thread, a potential red herring. Miss Harrow, I said gently, did Thorne ever act on this affection, or did Gray know of it? She shook her head. Dr. Gray knew nothing, I'm sure. Dr. Thorne never pressed me, but his manner changed. Distant, then angry. I thought it was the strain of their practice. Holmes stopped pacing, his gaze piercing. And the laboratory. Did you ever see Dr. Thorne there, handling compound X7 or similar substances? Her eyes widened. Compound X7. I've never heard of it. But Dr. Thorne spent hours in the laboratory, sometimes arguing with Dr. Gray. Once, I overheard him say, "Your mercy will be our ruin." I didn't understand, but it frightened me. Visual flashback to the laboratory, Thorne and Gray silhouetted against the green glow, their voices raised. Cut back to Miss Harrow. Wiping tears. her face a mix of fear and sincerity. The camera lingers on Holmes, his expression unreadable. Holmes nodded, as if a piece of the puzzle had slotted into place. "Thank you, Miss Harrow. You may go, but remain in London. Inspector, ensure her landlady confirms her alibi." Lestrade grumbled but nodded, escorting Miss Harrow out. As the door closed, I turned to Holmes. Her tears seem genuine, but her alibi is shaky. And this talk of jealousy, could Thorne's feelings for her have sparked the rift with Gray? Holmes lit his pipe, the match flaring in the dim room. "A possibility, Watson, but the laboratory holds the key. Thorne's warning about mercy aligns with Gray's euthanasia experiments. The note implicating Blackwood is a misdirection, but the hair and soot suggest an intruder, or a staged intrusion. Miss Harrow knows more than she admits, yet I doubt she is our poisoner." Visual Holmes puffing on his pipe, the smoke curling like the fog outside. The camera pans to the interrogation room's window, where fog presses against the glass, a distant foghorn sounding. Lestrade returns, his face skeptical. Lestrade crossed his arms. "You're chasing shadows, Holmes. Gray's the obvious suspect. Motive, means, and that note in Thorne's hand saying Gray. Why complicate it?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. Because Lestrade, the obvious is rarely the truth. The logical chain Thorne's knowledge of Gray's experiments gives motive. Compound X7 provides means, the staged note and hairpoint to misdirection. Miss Harrow's role, confidant or conspirator, remains unclear. We must analyse the hair and verify her alibi. As we left Scotland Yard, the fog enveloped us, the gas lamps mere pinpricks in the gloom. In our cab back to Baker Street, I reflected on the moral weight of the case. Holmes, if Thorne loved Miss Harrow and opposed Gray's experiments, his death feels all the more tragic. A betrayed confidant, caught in a web of ambition. Holmes's voice was soft, almost philosophical. "Indeed, Watson, trust, once broken, poisons more surely than curare. We are close, but the final threads elude us." The interrogation had woven new threads into the tapestry of Dr. Gray's sinister secrets, yet the truth remained shrouded. Miss Harrow's tears, Thorne's love, and Gray's experiments formed a tangled web, with the mysterious hair and staged note pointing to a hidden hand. The game, as Holmes would say, was drawing us deeper into the fog. Chapter 8. The Midnight Intruder. The mystery of Dr. Mortimer Gray's sinister secrets had grown ever more intricate, and Sherlock Holmes and I, Dr. John Watson, had returned to our lodgings at 221B Baker Street with minds burdened by the day's revelations. The interrogation of Miss Harrow at Scotland Yard had unveiled a tangle of motives. Thorne's unrequited love, his rift with Gray over experimental poisons, and the staged note implicating Blackwood, while the mysterious hair and soot hinted at an unseen hand. The fog of London, as persistent in this autumn of 1895 as the shadows in our case, seemed to cloak the truth in layers of deception. It was near midnight when we settled by the fire, Holmes with his pipe and I with my notebook, when a sudden noise, a faint creak from the stairs, shattered the quiet. Visual interior of 221B, the sitting room cosy yet tense, lit by the fire's warm glow. Holmes lounges in his armchair, puffing on his pipe, while Watson writes at a desk, the clock ticking toward midnight. The camera lingers on the door as a shadow passes beneath it, accompanied by a sharp creak sound effect. Holmes's head snapped up, his eyes gleaming with alertness. "Watson, extinguish the lamp," he whispered, rising silently. I complied, plunging the room into near darkness, save for the fire's flicker. The creak came again, closer now, followed by the soft scrape of a lock being tested. Someone was attempting to enter our rooms. Visual Holmes moving like a panther to the door, his silhouette sharp against the firelight. Watson grips his revolver, his face tense. The camera zooms in on the door handle, turning slowly as a low violin note builds suspense. Holmes flung open the door, revealing a figure cloaked in a dark coat, a scarf obscuring their face. The intruder, startled, lunged forward, a glint of steel in their hand, a knife aimed at Holmes. I raised my revolver, but Holmes was swifter, sidestepping the blade and seizing the intruder's wrist in a vice-like grip. A brief struggle ensued, the firelight casting wild shadows on the walls, until Holmes pinned the figure to the floor, wrenching the knife free. Visual action sequence, Holmes grappling with the intruder. Their struggle a blur of motion in the dim room. The knife clatters to the floor, glinting in the firelight. Watson stands ready, revolver aimed, as Mrs. Hudson's footsteps echo from below, her voice calling out in alarm. "Light the lamp, Watson," Holmes commanded, his voice steady despite the scuffle. I relit the gas lamp, revealing the intruder's face. Samuel Voss, his gaunt features pale with fear and defiance, his medical tattoo stark against his forearm. The scarf had fallen, and his eyes darted wildly, like a trapped animal's. Visual close-up on Voss's face, sweat beading on his brow, his tattoo illuminated by the lamp. The camera pans to the knife on the floor, then to Holmes, his expression a mix of triumph and scrutiny. A tense cello chord underscores the reveal. "Mr. Voss," Holmes said, his tone icy, "your penchant for nocturnal visits is most illuminating. Explain yourself, or Scotland Yard shall have you in irons within the hour." Voss struggled briefly, then slumped, his voice hoarse. "I meant no harm, Mr. Holmes. I came for the journal, Gray's laboratory journal. It's the only proof of his crimes, and I knew you'd taken it. He's framing me for Thorne's murder, I swear." I lowered my revolver, my mind racing. "The journal from the laboratory! How did you know we had it?" Voss's eyes flicked to the table where the journal lay among Holmes's papers. I followed you from Harley Street. I've been watching Gray's surgery, waiting for a chance to expose him. That journal details his poisons, Compound X7, the one that killed my sister and now Thorne. Visual flashback to the laboratory, Holmes pocketing the journal with its entries on Compound X7. Cut back to 2x, the journal on the table, its pages open to a diagram of a chemical apparatus. The camera lingers on Voss's desperate expression. Holmes released Voss, but kept a wary eye on him. "And the knife, Mr. Voss?" "A curious tool for retrieving evidence." Voss's hands trembled. "Protection, nothing more. London streets are dangerous, and Gray has allies, men who'd silence me as they did Eliza." Holmes picked up the knife, examining its blade under the lamp. "A surgical scalpel, Watson, not a common weapon. Note the residue. Talcum, like that in the surgery and warehouse." He turned to Voss. "Where did you obtain this?" Voss hesitated, then muttered, "From Gray's laboratory, years ago, when I took the curare vial. I kept it, thinking it might prove his guilt." Visual close-up on the scalpel, its blade glinting, a faint white powder visible. The camera cuts to Holmes's magnifying glass hovering over the talcum residue, then to Watson's troubled face, recalling the surgery's clues. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Your story is consistent, yet convenient. Let us test it." He retrieved a folded paper from his pocket. A payment slip, found in the warehouse, bearing Gray's signature and directing funds to an unnamed recipient. "This was among your possessions in the warehouse, Mr. Voss. Care to explain?" Voss's face paled further. "That's not mine." Gray must have planted it to incriminate me. He paid me nothing. I've been hiding, scraping by, trying to bring him down, I interjected, my medical instinct stirred. Holmes, the scalpel's talcum matches the surgery and warehouse. But the payment slip, its ink is fresh, like the staged note about Blackwood. Another misdirection. Holmes nodded, his expression inscrutable. Precisely, Watson. The ink is too recent for a document supposedly years old. Someone, Gray perhaps or another, wishes us to see Voss as the villain. He turned to Voss. You will remain here until we summon Lestrade. Attempt to flee, and you will regret it. Visual Holmes binding Voss's hands with a cord, his movements precise. The camera pans to the payment slip, its ink gleaming, under the lamp, then to Watson, his notebook open, scribbling furiously. A distant foghorn adds a chilling sound effect. As we secured Voss in a spare room, Mrs. Hudson, roused by the commotion, brought tea, her face a mix of concern and exasperation. "Mr. Holmes, must you always bring such trouble to my house?" she muttered, retreating downstairs. Holmes returned to the journal, flipping through its pages. Watson, observe these entries, dates, formulas, and a recurring phrase, for the greater good. Gray's experiments were not mere murder. He believed he was easing suffering. Yet Thorne's opposition, as Miss Harrow suggested, may have threatened exposure. I nodded, the logical chain forming. Thorne's knowledge of compound X7, his love for Miss Harrow, and Gray's ambition, motive, and means align. But the hair from the surgery, the soot, the fresh ink, they point to an outsider, or a clever ruse by Gray himself. Holmes's lips twitched. Well reasoned, Watson. The hair, dark, coarse, does not match Gray, Voss, or Miss Harrow. The soot suggests surveillance, yet its repetition feels staged. We must analyze the hair and test the scalpel's residue. And we must confront Gray with the journal's contents. Visual Holmes examining the journal, his fingers tracing a formula for compound X7. The camera zooms in on a sketch of a syringe, then cuts to the hair in a small envelope, labelled surgery window. A low cello drone builds tension. As we prepared to summon Lestrade, I reflected on the moral weight of the case. Holmes, if Gray's experiments were for mercy, yet led to murder, what does that say of his soul? And Voss, his desperation drives him to break in, but is he victim or villain? Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling like the fog outside. The heart, Watson, is as complex as the mind. Gray's intent may have been noble, but his methods betray him. Voss's actions stem from grief, yet grief can twist into vengeance. The truth lies in the balance of these motives, and we are close to tipping the scales. Visual, the camera pulls back to show 221B's sitting room, the fire crackling, the fog pressing against the windows. Holmes puffs on his pipe, his face half lit, while Watson gazes at the journal, troubled. The scene fades to the foggy street outside, a shadow lingering briefly before vanishing, accompanied by a suspenseful violin hum. The midnight intrusion had brought Samuel Voss back into our grasp, his scalpel and desperate plea adding new threads to the tapestry of Dr. Gray's secrets. Yet the fresh ink, the talcum, and the mysterious hair suggested a deeper conspiracy, with Gray or an unseen player pulling the strings. The game, as Holmes would say, was nearing its most dangerous turn. Chapter 9. Threads of Deception. The midnight intrusion by Samuel Voss had cast a new light on the sinister secrets of Dr. Mortimer Gray, yet the mystery of Dr. Elias Thorne's death remained as opaque as the fog enveloping London in this autumn of 1895. Sherlock Holmes and I, Dr. John Watson, had gathered an array of clues. Gray's journal detailing compound X7, the staged note implicating Blackwood, the mysterious hair and soot, Voss's scalpel with talcum residue, and the forged payment slip, all pointing to a web of deception spun by a cunning mind. As we sat in our rooms at 221B, the fire casting dancing shadows, Holmes paced before a stringboard he had constructed, his keen mind weaving the threads of the case into a coherent pattern. I, with my notebook open, felt the weight of the puzzle, sensing we were on the cusp of unravelling the truth, yet wary of the misdirection that had plagued us at every turn. Visual Holmes pacing before the stringboard, his silhouette sharp against the firelight. Red threads connect a photograph of Gray, a sketch of the curare vial, a copy of Eliza Voss's letter, and a map of Harley Street. Watson sits at a desk, his pen poised, his face a mix of concentration and unease. Holmes paused, his fingers tracing a thread from the journal to a photograph of the surgery. "Watson," he said, his voice low and intense, "the clues converge, yet the picture is incomplete. Let us review the chain of logic, step by step, to expose the weaver of this deception." I nodded, my medical training urging precision. "Begin with Eliza Voss's death at Bedlam, 15 years ago. Her letter accused Gray of dangerous experiments, and Samuel Voss claims she was poisoned by his synthetic compounds. This gives Samuel a motive for revenge." Holmes pinned a copy of Eliza's letter to the board, its Prussian blue ink stark against the yellowed paper. "Correct. But Samuel's means are questionable. Curare, while rare, was within his grasp as he stole a vial from Gray's laboratory. Yet his actions, skulking, breaking into our rooms, suggest desperation, not calculation. The forged payment slip and staged note implicating Blackwood point to a third party framing him. Visual close-up on the stringboard, Holmes pinning the letter, his fingers swift. The camera zooms in on the words "Beware Dr. Gray," then pans to a sketch of the payment slip, its ink suspiciously fresh. A soft cello note adds tension. I continued, following the thread. Then there's Thorne's death, poisoned by compound X7, a synthetic curare variant administered via his port. Gray's journal confirms he developed it for euthanasia, but Thorne's opposition, as Miss Harrow revealed, suggests he threatened to expose Gray. That's motive and means for Gray. Holmes nodded, pinning a vial labelled X7 to the board. Indeed, the talcum residue links the surgery, the warehouse, and Voss's scalpel, suggesting a single source, likely Gray's laboratory. But the hair, dark, coarse, unlike Gray's or Miss Harrow's, and the repeated soot marks indicate an outsider, or a deliberate plant to mislead us. I leaned forward, my mind racing. Miss Harrow's interrogation complicates things. Her alibi is unconfirmed, and Thorne's love for her adds jealousy as a potential motive. Could she have conspired with Gray, or acted alone? Holmes's eyes gleamed, his fingers connecting a thread to a photograph of Miss Harrow. Possible, but unlikely. Her tears were genuine, her knowledge of compound X7 limited. She is a pawn, not a player. The key lies in Gray's experiments and Thorne's knowledge. Let us hypothesize Gray killed Eliza Voss with an early version of his poison, perhaps accidentally. Thorne, his partner, discovered this years later, perhaps through Eliza's letter, and began to question Gray's methods. Visual flashback montage, sepia-toned images of Gray injecting a patient at Bedlam, Eliza's face contorted in pain, cut to Thorne finding her letter in a dusty file, his expression one of horror. Return to 221B, Holmes adjusting the string board, his movements precise. I followed his logic. Thorne's discovery led to their rift. Gray, fearing exposure, poisoned him with X7, staging the scene to look like an outside job, hence the soot, the hair, the note about Blackwood. But why frame Voss? Holmes pinned a sketch of the curare vial to the board, to divert suspicion. Voss, with his vendetta and stolen vial, was an easy scapegoat. The forged payment slip and fresh ink suggest Gray, or an ally, planted evidence to incriminate him. But the hair remains an anomaly. It does not match any suspect, suggesting a third party, perhaps a hired agent. I frowned, the moral weight of the case pressing upon me. Gray's experiments, if meant for mercy, have twisted into murder. Yet the precision of the misdirection, the staged notes, the soot, implies a mind colder than a grieving physician's. Holmes stopped pacing, his gaze fixed on the board. Precisely, Watson. The tapestry is nearly complete. Gray's motive silence, Thorne's threat of exposure, means compound X is 7, undetectable and lethal. Opportunity access to Thorne's port glass. The red herrings, Blackwood's note, Voss's vial, the payment slip, are designed to scatter our focus. But the hair and soot suggest a confederate, or a rival we have yet to uncover. Visual close-up on the stringboard, threads converging on a photograph of Gray, his gaunt face staring out. The camera zooms in on the hair in its envelope, labelled unknown, then pans to Holmes, his expression resolute. A suspenseful violin hum builds. I set down my pen, the logical chain clear. So, Gray is our poisoner, framing Voss and Blackwood to cover his tracks. The hair and soot could be errors in his plan, or evidence of another player. Perhaps someone from his university days, as Voss hinted. Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling like the fog outside. A sound deduction, Watson. We must test it. The hair requires analysis. Its texture and origin may point to our unknown. And we must confront Gray with the journal, forcing his hand. But first, we verify Miss Harrow's alibi. If it fails, she may yet be complicit. Visual Holmes puffing on his pipe, the smoke blending with the fire's glow. The camera pans to the window, where fog presses thickly, a shadow flickering briefly outside. A distant foghorn adds a chilling note. We summoned Inspector Lestrade, who confirmed that Miss Harrow's landlady had seen her return at 6:30, but could not vouch for her remaining home. Shaky Holmes, Lestrade grumbled. But you're chasing ghosts with this hair and soot business. Gray's your man. Lock him up and be done. Holmes's lips twitched. Patience, Lestrade. The truth is a delicate thread, easily snapped by haste. We shall visit Gray tomorrow, armed with the journal. If he is our poisoner, he will betray himself. As Lestrade departed, I turned to Holmes, the clues swirling in my mind. The red herrings are unravelling. Blackwood's alibi holds, Voss's desperation rings true. But the hair troubles me. Could it belong to a patient, or someone from Gray's past, like Professor Langley? Holmes's eyes gleamed. An excellent thought, Watson. Langley, Gray's mentor, may know of his experiments. We must trace him and analyze the hair's composition. The net tightens, but the final knot remains. Visual Holmes adjusting the stringboard, adding a note labelled Langley. The camera pulls back to show 221B's cosy interior, the fire crackling, the fog outside a living curtain. Watson gazes at the board, his face a mix of resolve and unease. I reflected on the moral undercurrent of the case. Holmes, if Gray killed to protect his experiments, believing them merciful, does that mitigate his crime? Or does ambition blind him to the lives he's taken? Holmes's voice was soft, almost philosophical. Ambition, Watson, is a fire that warms or consumes. Gray's intent may have been to ease suffering, but his methods have poisoned trust. The law will judge his actions, not his heart. Our task is to lay bare the truth. Visual. The camera lingers on Holmes, his face half lit by the fire, his pipe smoke curling upward. The scene fades to the foggy street outside. The gas lamps dim pinpricks in the mist, as the music shifts to a soft, suspenseful hum. The threads of deception were coming together. The red herrings of Blackwood and Voss falling away to reveal Dr. Gray at the centre of the web. Yet the mysterious hair and soot hinted at a final twist, a shadow yet to be named. As we prepared to confront Gray, the game, as Holmes would say, was reaching its climax. Chapter 10. The Unveiling. The web of deception spun around the death of Dr. Elias Thorne had drawn Sherlock Holmes and me, Dr. John Watson, to the precipice of truth. In this autumn of 1895, the fog of London seemed a mirror to the mystery's opacity. Yet Holmes's relentless logic had unravelled the threads Dr. Mortimer Gray's experimental poison, compound X7, the staged red herrings implicating Reginald Blackwood and Samuel Voss, the mysterious hair and soot, and the rift between Gray and Thorne over experiments meant for mercy, but twisted into murder. Armed with Gray's journal and the clues from our stringboard at 221B, we returned to Harley Street for a final confrontation, joined by Inspector Lestrade and a wary Samuel Voss, now released but under watch. As thunder rolled outside, I felt the weight of the case, sensing that the unveiling of Dr. Gray's sinister secrets would be as stormy as the night itself. Visual Holmes, Watson, Lestrade and Voss enter the surgery, their coats damp from the fog. The study is lit by a single gas lamp, casting long shadows. Gray stands behind his desk, his gaunt face pale, his eyes darting nervously. The camera lingers on the journal in Holmes's hand, its leather cover worn, and the crystal decanter of port on the desk, glinting ominously. Holmes stepped forward, his presence commanding, the journal held aloft like a judge's gavel. "Dr. Gray," he began, his voice steady and piercing, "the time for deception is over. Your secrets, your experiments, your poisons have led to murder, and we are here to lay bare the truth." Gray's hands trembled, but he met Holmes's gaze with a flicker of defiance. "I am no murderer, Mr. Holmes. My work was for the greater good, to ease suffering, to bring peace to the dying. You cannot understand." Visual close-up on Gray's face, his eyes haunted yet resolute. The camera cuts to Holmes, his expression unyielding, as he opens the journal to a marked page. Thunder cracks outside, shaking the windows. Holmes placed the journal on the desk, its pages open to the entry on compound X7. "This, Dr. Gray, details your creation of a synthetic curare variant, undetectable and lethal. You administered it to Dr. Thorne through his nightly port, to silence his threat of exposing your experiments. The evidence is irrefutable. The talcum residue in your laboratory, the forged payment slip implicating Voss, the staged note about Blackwood, all designed to mislead." Gray's face crumpled, his voice a whisper. "Thorne, he was my friend, my partner. But he turned against me, threatened to ruin everything. My work, compound X7, was meant to grant mercy to those beyond hope, like Eliza Voss years ago. She was terminal, her mind shattered. I eased her pain, but Thorne found her letter, believed I'd killed her deliberately. I stepped forward, my medical instincts stirred. Eliza Voss's death at Bedlam, was it truly mercy or an experiment gone wrong? And Thorne, did he die because he knew too much? Gray's eyes filled with tears. Eliza was an accident, I swear. The dose was too strong. untested. I buried it, moved on, but Thorne uncovered the truth. He loved Miss Harrow, thought my experiments endangered her, our practice, everything. He said he'd go to the authorities. I couldn't let him destroy my life's work. Visual flashback montage. Sepia-toned images of Gray administering a syringe to Eliza at Bedlam, her body slumping. Cut to Thorne finding her letter, his face contorted with rage, arguing with Gray in the laboratory. Return to the study, Gray sinking into his chair, his hands covering his face. Holmes's voice was relentless. So you poisoned his port with Exa-7, knowing its paralytic effects would mimic a natural death. You planted the note in his hand, Gray, to suggest an outside killer. The soot and hair at the surgery, the forged slip in the warehouse, your attempts to frame Voss and Blackwood. Voss, standing beside Lestrade, erupted. You monster! You killed my sister, then Thorne, and tried to pin it on me. He lunged forward, but Lestrade restrained him, his face grim. Visual Voss, struggling against Lestrade, his tattooed arm tense. The camera cuts to Holmes, holding up a gloved hand, revealing a pair of gloves stained with a faint residue. Lightning flashes, illuminating the room. Holmes produced a pair of Gray's gloves from his coat, their cuffs dusted with talcum. These, found in your laboratory, bear traces of compound X7. You handled the poison carelessly, Dr. Gray, and the hair, dark, coarse, from a wig you used to stage the intrusion, leaving soot to suggest an outsider. Gray's defiance shattered, his voice a broken sob. I wrote the threatening letter to myself, to draw suspicion away. The wig, the soot, it was all to protect my work. I never meant for it to go this far. Thorne's death, it was to save my legacy, to continue my mission of mercy. I felt a pang of pity, tempered by horror. Your mission became murder, Gray. Your ambition blinded you to the lives you took. Holmes's eyes were cold. The logical chain is complete. Eliza Voss's death. An accidental overdose led to Thorne's discovery and your fear of exposure. You poisoned him, staged red herrings, Blackwood's note, Voss's vial, the forged slip, to mislead. The hair and soot were your final errors, betraying your hand. Visual Holmes pinning the gloves to the stringboard, now brought into the study, connecting them to the journal, the vial, and the hair. The camera zooms in on Gray's face, tears streaming as thunder roars outside. Lestrade stepped forward, handcuffs in hand. Dr. Mortimer Gray, you're under arrest for the murder of Dr. Elias Thorne and the manslaughter of Eliza Voss. Gray offered no resistance. His shoulders slumped as Lestrade led him out into the fog, Voss following with a mix of triumph and grief. Visual Gray being led out, his face ashen, the fog swallowing him as Lestrade's men close in. Voss glares after him, then turns away, his expression conflicted. The camera lingers on the empty study, the decanter glinting as rain begins to patter against the windows. Back at 221B, as the storm raged outside, Holmes and I sat by the fire, the weight of the case settling over us. I turned to him, my notebook closed. Holmes, Gray's intent was mercy, yet it led to such darkness. What does that say of human ambition? Holmes puffed on his pipe, the smoke curling like the fog. It says, Watson, that the dose makes the poison. Gray's desire to ease suffering twisted into hubris, poisoning trust and lives. In medicine, as in life, the line between healer and killer is perilously thin. I nodded, reflecting on the moral lesson. And Voss, Blackwood, Miss Harrow, they were all caught in his web, their lives marred by his secrets. Holmes's eyes softened. Indeed, the truth, once unveiled, brings justice, but not always peace. Our task is done, Watson, but the shadows linger. Visual Holmes and Watson by the fire, the string board now bare, its threads removed. The camera pulls back to show 221B's cosy interior, the storm outside a distant rumble as the music shifts to a melancholic violin melody. The case of Dr. Mortimer Gray had ended, its sinister secrets laid bare in a storm of revelation. Justice had been served, yet the philosophical weight remained. Ambition unchecked becomes a poison, and even mercy, misapplied, can kill. As the fog lifted from Baker Street, I felt the warmth of our hearth, a small bastion against the darkness we had faced.